Dr. Akiva Gamliel, Belk, Dean of Jewish Studies at Noach Torah Institute, LLC. Welcome to Bereisheit, Limood, Kuf Gimel. That's Genesis chapter 23. And we're going to be looking at, God willing, verses 1 through 20. There's 20 verses in Genesis 23. This is our textbook, Gematria and Mysticism in Genesis, Book 3. I encourage you to pick up a copy. We're going to be examining some really unique and interesting Gematrias today. Our discussion is entitled Chayei's Death. And while we'll be discussing death, we'll also be discussing life. And we'll be discussing how plans that we make may not come to fruition. That's why it's so important to say God willing, because if God doesn't will, then all the plans that we make are nothing. Dear ones, when we look at chapter, I wrote it out on a sheet of paper, and I intended to have this as part of the book. In Genesis chapter 23, 1 and 2, it says, "And Sarah was 127 years old. These were the years of the life of Sarah." Now, in Pasuk Bet, that's verse 2, "And Sarah died in Kiriath Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn for Sarah, and Beli Bekota, and to weep for her." Now, the very last word of the chapter 23, verse 2 is Vele Bekota, okay? And that means to weep. So Abraham came to weep. And we know that when one dies, that there is mourning, and there is weeping, and there is emotions. However, the Torah chose, by using the Gematria Ot, this is a sign that is given through a letter. The Kuf is smaller. And this is how it is written in HaTorah, with the Kuf being smaller. And so that's to help us understand that life is so incredibly precious, and that Abraham was expressing emotions that cannot be written into words. So what do we learn from the letter Kuf? Well, this is normally the Gematria of 20. And so the word Velevo Kota would be a Gematria of 463 normally. However, because the letter Kuf is reduced, we go to Gematria Katan. And so instead of it being 20, it's the number 2. We drop the 0. And so the Gematria becomes 445. Now, when we look at the letter Kuf, the normal Gematria of the letter Kuf is 20. But when it drops to 2, that means it loses 18. So it goes from 20 to 2. That's a difference of 18. And the letter Chai, which means life, is the Gematria of Chet and Yud, 18. So we can recognize that Abraham mourned, that he wept, that he bewailed for Sarah, that her life was gone. We recognize that when we're talking about mourning, our sages teach that we learn from the letter Kuf that mourning has 2 stages. The first stage is 2 days, and the second stage is 5 days. Now, we recognize that when we're thinking in terms of 2 days, we realize we get this from the letter Kuf, because it's the Kuf is Kuf Katan. It's just reduced to 2. And so we recognize that in the first 2 days of mourning, the Creator Himself comes to mourn. We recognize that the second day, the angels, the Malach, come to mourn. And so the kuf is a letter that represents the keter, the crown. And so we recognize this is when our Creator mourns, and this is when mourning is the intense part of mourning. And this is when the angels also come to mourn. Now the 5 days after that are represented by the letter Hey. The letter Hey is spelled Hey, Aleph. And the Hey represents 5. So 2 plus 5 is 7. There are 7 days of mourning. However, we recognize that on one day during the week we do not mourn, and that is Shabbat. And so the Aleph represents God. And we take the Aleph away from the 7, and we have 6. And this Aleph is the Yud, and the Yud, which is 10 and 10, and then the Vav, which is 6, is 26. And so we take this Aleph, and we recognize that the letter Hey is spelled with a Hey and an Aleph. That's 6. And if we reduce that from the 26, because this is 10, 10, and 6 is 26, we have 20, and we're back to the kuf. And we recognize that the letter Hey is 5, so 5 plus 2 is 7. And we recognize that in the letter Hey, there's the Aleph, which that's the day we don't mourn, that's Sabbath. And then the other 5 days that we do mourn. So, dear ones, we see in this very interesting and unique gematria ot, this tremendous power of the letter kuf, and how just changing the size of the kuf brings such incredible mysticism to the surface for us to explore, to understand, to learn. Now, there's a few things that we should be aware of, and we should think about when we're talking about Chayei's death. We're talking about Chayei's life also. You know, when Chayei died, oh my, she didn't get to see her son Yitzhak, his bride. She didn't get to attend the chasana, the wedding. She didn't get to dance at her son's wedding. She didn't get to see her grandchildren born and grow and hold them on her lap. It was all taken away. You say, oh my, that seems so hard. It seems so difficult. But yet, dear ones, we know Chayei was a prophetess. We know that she was a very righteous, holy woman. And we know that her leaving this world is to let us know that there are times when we won't be able to enjoy some of the things that we plan to. We need to remember, say, God willing, think God willing, I'll do this, God willing. And so Chayei, she was taken from us at the age of 127, exactly 127. She died on her birthday, and on Avram's birthday. And so we recognize that she had this beautiful miracle. God gave her a beautiful baby, Yitzhak. It was a miracle. He was born when she was like, he was conceived at 90. And so we recognize this beautiful baby she got to enjoy for 37 years. And she kept a close eye on him. And she was unhappy when she saw that Ishmael was throwing spears close to Yitzhak. She went to Abraham and told him, cast out this bondwoman and her son, that he's not going to inherit with my son, with Yitzhak. And the Lord God said, do it, listen to the voice of your wife, Sarah. And so Abraham did. And so we recognize that she had these very special times, these very unique and wonderful times. Mothers are so incredibly special. They have the baby, they feel the baby move and kick and turn and do all kinds of unique motions in their womb. And so they have this tenderness, this closeness, this special bond with their children. I remember as a young boy coming down from my bedroom to the kitchen of our home, and my mother was crying. And I said, Mama, why are you crying? And she called me Buddy. That was my nickname. She says, Buddy. She's wiping tears from her eyes. Today is Don's birthday. Now, Don was my older brother. May he rest in peace. And another time I remember on February of 21st day that I come down again, my mother's crying. Mom, why are you crying? Today is Gary Lee's birthday. Both of my brothers died. Gary Lee was stillborn. We teach that those that are born on the same day and die on the same day are very holy, that are very righteous. Moshe Rabbeinu, Sarah. And so we recognize there's this unique holiness, this being very special to God. We don't understand why children are still born, why it's permitted, but it is. And we recognize that you carry this baby, you have these expectations, you have these hopes, you have these dreams, and they're gone. They're gone. Just like that. They're gone. Sarah was gone. Abraham came, and he wept, and he wept, and he wept. Rebbetzin Rebbe, not all that long ago, a little over about 5 years ago, lost her daughter Carrie. May she rest in peace at a young age. Oh my, well, in her 40s, but that's still a young age, Mitzvah Shem. And so we recognize that all the hopes that we have, the joys, the thoughts of bouncing our grandchildren on our knee, the thoughts of going places together and doing things can just be gone. Just like that. We recognize that after Sarah died, Abraham married again. Now we'll be talking about that, God willing, when we get to chapter 25. But Abraham had other children. And I'd like to just mention that, you lose children. Nobody wants to lose a spouse. No one wants to lose a child. We know that there are other children often involved. And Abraham, he was taken out of the picture after the 10th trial that we spoke about in Genesis chapter 22, the 10th trial of Abraham. We know that when after this trial, that his responsibilities now were passed on to Yitzhak. Yitzhak stood there and willingly presented himself on the Mizbeach, and Abraham tied him with his gartel, and he was willing to give his life up, and God passed the covenant on to Yitzhak. So Abraham still lived for a number of years afterwards and had many children. Torah doesn't say a great deal about these children, but they're important to God. And God does say something about the sons that Abraham had after the death of Sarah. Mitzvah Hashem, I'm looking forward to the day that we'll all join and go to the mount of the Lord and enter his house and say tefillah, say praises, and to be happy in his presence. Baruch Hashem. Thank you for joining with me.